Hey guys, this is Dawood with AutoMarketplace. Today we're going to talk about Uber NYC lockouts. It's a huge topic these days. We haven't done one of these in a while. So what we're going to do, in case you forgot, and understandable if you did, what we usually tend to do is we kind of draft up an article in our newsletter. And then we embed this video. We talk to the article and we actually embed the video in this article. Obviously, we're distributing it direct on YouTube as well. So let's get right into it because there's so many different dynamics. And honestly, I could talk about this topic for 5 hours because there's so many different elements to it. But I'm going to try to keep it focused. I'm going to try to explain it as simply as possible and kind of follow a structure. The video at the end of the day might be 45 minutes to an hour long, but I'm going to try to keep it shorter. But it's not so simplistic. I think a lot of people are framing this very simplistically, but there's a lot of different angles to it. So we're going to share our perspective that's based on a lot of different discussions and factors and institutional knowledge about the industry, about how Uber works, about regulations. So this is how we're going to frame this discussion, frame this video. And our goal is trying to kind of present the facts and layer on our opinion so you can be better informed about what's going on. And maybe you reach different conclusions than we do, but we just want to frame this as best as possible. And so, you can understand what's going on because it is kind of confusing to understand. Okay, so it says below, I overview why lockouts are occurring. So, what is this even about? Why is Uber doing this in New York City? Who Uber is blaming for lockouts and whether that criticism is legitimate, what the TLC can do about lockouts, and obviously Uber might view why they're locking out as legitimate, but we're going to kind of layer on our own perspective of that. What the TLC can do about lockouts, how we believe drivers should think about lockouts, suggestions that would prevent lockouts, including those already proposed by prominent driver advocates like the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, NYTWA, or the Independent Drivers Guild, IDG, some which we agree with, some which we have a different perspective on, and recent insights from our own fleet business, which we have, and also we advise other fleets too. So our perspective is coming from multiple angles on this. I personally and our team, Jason, Adrian, we speak to a lot of people. So Adrian speaks to a lot of NYC TLC drivers. Jason speaks to a lot of NYC TLC drivers. I speak to a lot of NYC TLC drivers. So then if we kind of combine all those perspectives, that we're getting insights from 100, 200 plus drivers, plus fleets, plus other industry players. So we feel like our perspective is pretty holistic. Okay, so we're not going to read every article verbatim. And we're also going to, again, I said this article might be 45 minutes to an hour, so we'll provide a table of contents too. But this article we'll kind of read verbatim, but the other ones we'll kind of skip around. And we'll provide links to all of these articles, by the way, in case. Okay, so as we and many on social media have been covering, NYC for hire transportation, TLC drivers are facing Uber lockouts. The term lockout is TLC slang for a situation where Uber or Lyft limits the ability for a driver to go online. Given Uber and Lyft combined have over 80% NYC trip market share, this is impacting a lot of drivers. So basically, if there's 100 trips in New York City, Uber and Lyft are doing 8 of 10 of those trips. So this is a huge deal for this market. And so as an example, this is a screenshot from the Uber drivers app. And so they're saying how to go online, drive during open access time. So, the days and the times, it's basically, they're just kind of stating the obvious, but there's like when it's busy. So like Friday night will be busy. So if you go online at Friday night, you're probably not going to be locked out. So it says go to busier areas, wait a few minutes and try again. Drive outside New York City and places such as New Jersey or Long Island. I mean, that's not even a real suggestion. That means you should quit the TLC industry, and that's just not practical, especially if a driver has a TLC plate, has a TLC driver's license. This industry is more lucrative historically. So I rate the lockout dynamic is the antithesis of Uber and Lyft's original pitch of work when you want, where you want. Lockouts also strip away one of the key attractions of being an independent contractor, the ability to choose when you want to work. Many NYC drivers are understandably frustrated. Some are quitting. Some believe they will be forced to quit. Some are nervous. Some think it's a good thing. For those who are in the TLC industry, before the pandemic, this won't be their first time experiencing app lockout. So this actually occurred before, but it looked different. That being said, today's lockouts have a different look and feel than the ones that occurred in late 2019 and early 2020, just before the pandemic. Those lockouts were more straightforward, where a driver was told upfront the benchmarks they need to hit to access the Uber app. Drivers could also reserve blocks of times ahead of schedule in an Uber planner. And Lyft kind of had lockouts as well, but we're just going to focus on Uber, their dynamics, because they're the larger player. But obviously Lyft at that time also had, they didn't call it a planner. I think they basically limited access in a different way. So back then, so this is a screenshot, to be clear, from January 2020. This is how lockouts look. So an Uber Black driver sent this to us. And so at that time, it was kind of very easy. Like, it was still annoying, don't get us wrong, to a lot of drivers, but at least it was like you could game it. Like you could kind of say, okay, this is what I need to do to not be locked out. So very simply, it says, what Uber said at that time is like, okay, if you do more than 1,000 trips, so roughly 300, call it 35 trips every month on average, okay, you can go online at any time. For Black, obviously, those are more lucrative trips, but they're less of those trips and they need that driver supply. It's, 250 plus. So in this screenshot, this particular driver did 407 Uber Black, 556 total trips, but 407 of those were Uber Black. So it says obviously the rating was very good. There was another angle. I think you needed above like a 4.8 or 4.85 as well, and a cancellation rate and all of this stuff. So in any case, it said, as a result, again, January 2020, you're able to go online anytime without using the planner. Let's say you had 700 trips or 200, reserve a time at Wednesday at 10 a.m. It's almost like this kind of first dibs, like if you didn't reach those benchmarks, you could then schedule your block of time. Still annoying, but at least visibility. This time it's totally different. So let's actually go right to this article we published on May 16th. It says Uber NYC lockouts have arrived. So this is actually the message that Uber sent. So it says, learn how TLC regulations impact you. Dear, and then it was whoever they sent it to, the driver. The TLC regulates drivers' utilization, meaning the amount of time drivers spend on a trip as a share of their total time online. We're going to explain this more and try to make it more simple. The busier drivers are, the more they are utilized. Every year, the TLC sets a minimum utilization rate, often abbreviated as UR, but it's calculated industry-wide. So Uber and Lyft's rates are combined together. Even though Uber's utilization rate is on track to be above the minimum TLC regulations, Lyft's rate is over 5 percentage points lower. Earlier this year, we paused giving new drivers access to Uber, but Lyft's inability to keep drivers busy means we have to do more to make up for their shortfall. We'll get into analyzing, dissecting that. What's to come? Platform access. There may be changes to your ability to go online in certain areas and during certain times of day. Additional waitlists. Drivers without trip activity over a period of time may be added to a waitlist and unable to go online. So that's even, just to be clear, like let's say you have Uber NYC access right now. If you don't do enough trips or you're inactive, let's say you go away, when you come back, maybe you're on the wait list, which at this point might be months long. Incentive. Drivers may see changes to incentives. And then there's a very technical one, which we'll discuss later on and briefly. We may need to stop sending ride requests to certain vehicles unless they are affiliated with FHVs, high volume for higher service bases. We'll explain that, but that's kind of a secondary point without causing a huge amount of confusion in explaining why lockouts are occurring. So it says, what can you do to conclude? If you want to maintain existing flexibility as NYC FHV driver, there's your opportunity to let the TLC know the effect the rules have on your ability to earn, where and when you want. Click below to send them a message. Tell the TLC to revise the rules. So Uber is kind of blaming TLC, but if you actually click into that message, they're actually kind of, this is their pre-draft. When you click that link, this is what kind of showed up. And look at the subject line: revise the rule, hold Lyft accountable. So we'll get back to that. So they're kind of blaming TLC, they're kind of blaming Lyft. So okay, so let's take this back to, let's simplify this as much as possible. Okay, so Okay, so this article I'm going to reference right now is May 21st. We published it. UR remains sub 53% in March as Uber officially launches NYC Lockout. What's going on? Okay. The simplest way to think about this is, I'll start with this paragraph. The TLC's utilization rate metric was created with a noble goal of making sure Uber and Lyft paid commercially licensed NYC TLC drivers fairly. For example, a driver is paid a gross wage of $30 per hour for 20 minutes they're online and driving for Uber, but that driver isn't earning anything for the 40 minutes they are idle, waiting for the next trip, but still online the Uber or Lyft app. Clearly, that driver is not earning $30 per hour. They're effectively earning less than New York State mandated minimum wage. So, I mean, I think you probably understand what we're saying, but this is the formula. Like, okay, for the 20 minutes you're busy, you're actually getting paid the $30 an hour. I think it's technically like $28 around there. But so, okay, so for that 20 minutes you're paying $30, but for the other 40 minutes you're paying $0. So you're actually you're getting paid below minimum wage. So we write, UR feels like an intelligent metric that a very smart person or a group of smart people spend a lot of time formulating in a university setting. However, it's not working. Firstly, it only applies to Uber and Lyft and NYC. The other sectors of the NYC for hire transportation are not subject to it. Okay, we'll stop there. We'll get back to this article. So basically, step number one, what is UR? Why was it created? This is the reason. So let's be clear about this is the reason why UR was created was if you just create a minimum wage to protect drivers, if you don't layer on like how busy a driver is kept, then the minimum wage is not effective. You know, if okay, let's say Uber and Lyft agree or they're forced to pay a minimum wage of $28 an hour, but it doesn't matter how busy or not busy they keep a driver. Think about it this way. Uber could just send like a million drivers, keep a million drivers busy for 10 minutes an hour. And yes, during those 10 minutes, they'll pay them $30 an hour. But obviously, those drivers aren't earning a minimum wage. They're earning like, you know, they're earning like, you know, below poverty wage, essentially, in that instance. Okay. So now we're going to jump to this other article, May 17th, 2024. Just ignore this. I will get back to this HV FHS space that was referenced. Okay. Let's use another example to explain this a little bit more technically. Again, the goal of this video, I could spend 5 hours discussing this, but the goal of this video is try to break this down as simply as possible. So, you know, you understand what's going on, what this means, like what is utilization rate? Why did TLC create it? So I think it's pretty easy to understand what we've just explained, that they created a utilization rate on top of a minimum wage rate. So Uber and Lyft doesn't game that system, that it doesn't pay a driver $30 an hour for 10 minutes and it pays a million drivers like that. So everybody's earning this kind of really bad wage. Okay. So this is how the TLC officially defines UR. The utilization rate is the percentage of a time that high volume drivers, so only Uber and Lyft are high volume drivers, all other bases, and we'll get into we'll get into it right now. What a base is basically is that you might be wondering, like, why do we need a base? What does that even mean? In New York City, in order to dispatch a for hire trip, you need a base. And the very easy to understand reason for needing a base is, think about this way. If a base dispatches a trip to a passenger, they need to collect the sales tax. They need to collect the black car fund fee of 3%. They need to collect MTA fees, which another one's going to launch on May 30th. So there's all these compliance reasons. And then there's also, New York City also wants to collect the data on who's doing what trips, what the average fare is. So that's kind of why you have bases fundamentally. It's kind of like a compliance mechanism, because if you didn't have bases, then it's very hard to track, okay, who owes what sales tax, what's the average, what are trips looking like, what is, how to create policy around that. So that's kind of why you have a base. At least that's how I view it. Okay, so utilization rate, UR is the percentage of time that high volume drivers are transporting passengers. passengers. It is calculated by dividing the time spent with a passenger by the total time that drivers are logged into the app, including time waiting for a dispatch, time en route to pick up a passenger, and time with a passenger. Easy enough. I'm just kidding. That's like, that explanation kind of makes sense, but it's also very technical. So let's just make this simple. Or at least in our perspective, let's make this simple. So we give this example. Okay, so an NYC driver is logged on for 60 minutes an hour to Uber and Lyft. That's a very common dynamic. I'm sure also outside of New York City. But in New York City, Uber and Lyft. Okay, trip number 1, they're logged on to both Uber and Lyft. The driver waits 8 minutes and then gets an Uber job. But their Lyft app is kind of technically still on. Total trip takes 24 minutes, but it takes 5 minutes en route to the trip. You get the ping and then it takes 5 minutes to actually reach the person. Okay, that trip is done. Then trip number 2. Again, the driver's logged on to both Uber and Lyft. The driver waits 5 minutes. It gets a Lyft job this time. And then the Uber app is on. The total trip takes them 23 minutes, including 10 minutes en route to the pickup. So they get the ping and then it takes, let's say they hit a traffic snag or whatever. So it takes 10 minutes to get to for the passenger to actually enter the car. So this is how, in that instance, where it's just very simplistic, where it's like, okay, the driver's logged on to just Uber and Lyft, not any other base. This is how a utilization rate is actually calculated. Okay, let's just break this down simply. So time waiting during those 60 minutes. So in trip 1, the driver's waiting 8 minutes. In trip 2, the driver's waiting 5 minutes. So time waiting is 13 minutes. Trip en route. So like when you get the ping, then you actually have to, the passenger's not in the car yet. You actually have to pick up the passenger. So in trip 1, it took the driver 5 minutes to actually pick up the passenger. In trip 2, it took him 10 minutes. So 15 minutes en route. So the time of that hour, of that one hypothetical hour where the passenger was in the car, was 32 minutes. Therefore, the utilization rate is 32 minutes of passenger in the car time over the 60 minutes that they were logged online is 53%. That is how a utilization rate is calculated. So we gave a very simple reason why the UR exists in the first place, to prevent abuse of minimum wage, and how the UR is kind of calculated. And 53% is a key metric because what TLC has basically said, without getting, again, this can get so technical, but just to be simplistic, the 53% is effectively what the TLC wants Uber and Lyft to abide by. Although if they hit 53%, they give them credit for 58%. I mean, another topic altogether, but basically they need to hit 53%. That's why we actually use that example. So that's the floor that the TLC is requiring, 53%. Okay, then just to round out the utilization rate discussion, again, because this is just really important for all drivers to understand, all industry participants to understand. Okay, so this article is from April 18th. We published Uber and Lyft UR remains sub 53%. EV trip market share is surging. Not a discussion for this video. But here again, this is even getting one layer deeper into utilization rate. Okay. What is utilization rate? Why did the TLC create this measurement, which we kind of already overviewed in multiple ways? And why would it cause Uber and Lyft to introduce lockouts? This is April 18th. This is actually before the lockouts were occurred, but we could, us and other people could see it coming. So, okay. There are 3 key inputs. So remember we said there's a minimum wage and there's a UR, right? So the UR is embedded into the minimum wage formula, essentially. So how a driver gets paid: per mile rate, per minute rate. Per mile rate estimates driver expenses such as fuel, maintenance, and insurance. Per minute rate solves for a net wage that's benchmarked New York State and city gross minimum wage, and then the UR, right? So this is like the technical in the regulation definition. The utilization rate accounts for the time that drivers spend without a passenger in a vehicle. It is calculated by dividing the total time that a high volume for hire service driver spends transporting passengers by the total amount of time that the drivers are logged into the app, including time waiting for dispatch en route to pick up a passenger, time with the passenger. So we just calculate at. Now, this $23 was the original one. This has gone up, I think, to like around $28. But I think you kind of have an idea. Okay, the UR is basically when a driver is logged onto the app, how busy are they kept, and you have to layer that onto the minimum wage formula, because if there's just simply a minimum wage, Uber could dispatch, it could keep like a million drivers busy for 10 minutes, pay them the $30, $28 minimum wage for those 10 minutes. But obviously, for the hour that driver's online, they're earning way below minimum wage. So that is why the UR was created. Hopefully, that explains what UR is. Okay. So let's get back to the lockouts. Now that you have an understanding that, okay, let's kind of explain. So in the lockout message, and now we're referring back to our May 16th article, Uber, let's go over these bullet points. Okay, it says Uber sent out an email distribution to NYC TLC drivers warning of lockouts, including limiting dispatches to vehicles not affiliated with Uber Lyft's NYC bases, HVFHs, high volume bases. So to be clear, what we just spoke about, the minimum wage and the UR, it only applies to Uber and Lyft. And a high volume base is a base that dispatches more than 10,000 trips per day, which is only Uber and Lyft. Uber wants NYC TLC drivers to send a message, we went over this, with pre-filled but editable subject line that reads, revised rules hold Lyft accountable. Uber's demand to be judged on a standalone UR utilization rate seems reasonable, but there are major consequences, including Lyft to lose a lot of its NYC market share and the rise of Uber-only or Lyft-only NYC drivers. And now March utilization rates have been published, so we'll go over that very briefly. And then there's our opinion. NYC TLC drivers, this is based on base affiliation. We won't get into that quite yet. And so, okay. So let us go to, yes, okay. This is the correct article. Okay. What does this mean? So just to be clear, so I know we're skipping around a lot. This is the May 16th article. Again, the links to all of this will be provided. Okay. What does this mean? Let's start from here. Uber is finally doing what has been fairly predictable for several months now. The company is warning its NYC TLC driver base that it might need to limit access. It's actually done that now, lockouts, to its NYC drivers app because of TLC utilization rate rules. As we've been covering, Uber and Lyft utilization rates, UR, how busy an NYC TLC driver is kept while logged into an app or apps, has been dangerously below that 53% UR floor required by the TLC minimum pay formula. Basically, if they can't keep a busy, a Lyft or Uber driver if they can't keep a TLC driver who works for those high volume apps busy at that 53% level, they effectively have to essentially have to come out of pocket to make sure they're being paid minimum wage. That's the best way to think about that. In fact, Lyft's UR is 45% year to date to February, and we all the March statistics. It's still below. Basically, everybody's UR is still basically below 53%. Although Uber's correct to say theirs is very close to 53%. So this is what we wrote in April 18th. Remember, industry UR is measured on a calendar year, January-December basis. So there might be some months that can drag the average lower, but are offset by other months that are busier. A 49.7% industry-wide UR still seems dangerous below 53%. Okay, we won't read the whole thing, but basically what we're saying is that it's not like if the UR in 1 month is below 53%, then Uber all of a sudden says, okay, we're going to go, we immediately course correct. They basically measure it on a 12-month basis to make sure, they account for seasonal dips and everything. January is slow, August is slow. And that's, that's fair. It should be on a calendar year basis. Okay. So we're kind of getting to the point, and I'm sorry if I'm being long-winded, but we're getting to the point of why is Uber blaming Lyft, or why we don't think that's actually a genuine criticism, or that's actually a very dangerous thing if a driver says, oh yeah, Uber's right, it is Lyft to blame. Okay. So we write, Remember, Uber and Lyft cannot coordinate their dispatching strategy for several reasons, from collusion concerns to Lyft perhaps wanting to free ride off of Uber's higher utilization rate, as outlined by Uber executive Josh Gold in a March 2023 public hearing testimony. We have that on YouTube. There's the link to it if you click that. I don't know, there's a quote, I don't know when a driver's online with Lyft, so I can only guess to Uber's utilization rate. It also raises some concerns about free rider because one company may have to hold up the other company's utilization rate. Okay, so you might be saying, well, what, Dawood, what are you getting at? We still don't understand the point. Uber is saying that we can keep drivers busier, but Lyft can't keep their driver busier. So Uber to ask for a standalone UR is legitimate. We'll get into this, but very simply, Uber has 75% market share relatively, like I think it's 76%, and Lyft has 24% of non-yellow cab and other black car base. They, like, of the whole market, they have like 80% share, probably a little bit more than that. Why you need to do it on industry-wide UR is because the way most drivers operate in this industry, think about it, the way most drivers operate in this industry is they have both apps on at the same time. So going back to let me get the article. Going back to this example, think about this. It's Uber and it's Lyft, right? So imagine during trip 2 when the guy got the Lyft job. Imagine if he was still online, or she or they were still online on the Uber app, and that time occupied with Lyft was being counted toward Uber's utilization rate. That would crush Uber's utilization rate, and vice versa. If when the driver was doing the trip for the Uber app, but they were online with Lyft still during that time, it would crush Lyft's UR. So because these two companies kind of have a duopoly market share, you need to measure it on an industry-wide basis, because the drivers are switching between both apps, in at least in my opinion. Okay, now we kind of spelled this out. Fair point, but beware. So just to let you know, I'm sorry we're skipping around so much. May 16th, 2024. Okay. Fair point, but beware. We empathize with Uber's complaint regarding the use of industry UR metric, and in fact recently called for the TLC to eliminate the UR metric altogether. We'll get into that later. We actually think the UR doesn't deserve to exist. Some people might vehemently disagree with that, but instead we believe the TLC should focus on strictly capping for higher vehicle supply, TLC plated vehicles, and even potentially consider limiting the issuance of NYC TLC commercial driver license. So the actual, not the plates or the vehicle licenses, but actually the driver licenses themselves. And IDG has been a big proponent of this, and they've mentioned this last year. So in a May 7th article, which we'll get to, we write, get rid of UR, enforce the TLC plate cap, and perhaps even consider a TLC driver's license cap. It is time for the TLC to be proactive, not reactive. We want the TLC to be successful, or it will lose credibility. That was May 7th. Now we have lockouts. There's going to be protests. So, this is from New York taxi worker, and I'm sure IDG is also gathering, but I know this for a fact. So New York Taxi Workers Alliance on June 12th at 1 p.m. in front of Uber's headquarters, hold Uber accountable to what we are owed, hold TLC accountable to regulating a stable industry with dignity for drivers. Okay, there you go. Okay, so our warning to NYC TLC drivers is, if Uber is judged on a standalone UR like they want to, what they're asking drivers to do, two things will likely happen. Again, this is our opinion. Okay, scenario 1, Uber kills Lyft. Again, this is our opinion. We're just framing why we don't think this is a genuine criticism or very dangerous, actually. Uber's much larger trip market share in New York City, close to 75% versus 25% for Lyft, will likely result in previously dual app TLC drivers choosing to be online with Uber more. In a standalone utilization rate world, Lyft will be forced to launch much stricter NYC driver lockouts to increase their UR. Lyft is not benefiting from Uber's higher utilization rate. we're going to explain this if you're not following. This will create a doom loop for Lyft, where Lyft NYC driver supply declines, passenger wait times go up, passengers then increasingly prefer Uber, Uber gets more trip, drivers are more attracted to Uber, Uber finally kills Lyft in NYC, death by utilization rate. Okay, let me try to simply explain that. Maybe you did follow along with that. So think about what I'm saying. So if each company in a dual app world is being held on a standalone UR basis, Uber is the larger company, so it's easy for them to keep the drivers busy. So what I think Uber's asking for this, because it's it honestly makes strategic sense for them. They're like, Lyft can't really keep the drivers busy to abide by this 53% rule. So actually, let's double down on this rule, because we know we can get 53%. And if Lyft is judged on a standalone basis, let's say on a standalone basis, Lyft can only do a UR of 40%. So then their lockouts that Lyft would have to launch would be so much more stricter to get to 53% than Uber, that more drivers would leave Lyft to go to Uber. So do you get that point? Leave a comment. Leave a comment in the YouTube video, this YouTube video, or our Substack, and we'll try to explain it better. I hope that's clear. But basically, because Uber has the larger trip share and Lyft has a smaller trip share, if each of them was judged on a standalone basis, Lyft would basically have to launch very harsh driver lockouts, and Uber would benefit because a lot of Lyft drivers or a lot of dual app drivers would get frustrated and then just say, well, Uber's busier, and then Uber would actually have a higher UR. And, again, leave a comment if that's not clear. I'm trying to keep this video shorter rather than longer, but it's already long, I know. Okay, another scenario. Uber only, Lyft only NYC drivers. If Lyft is judged on a standalone UR basis, it will need to launch stricter driver lockouts to increase its UR, as just discussed. This also might cause Lyft to send more trips to a smaller subgroup of Lyft-only drivers who will basically only work for Lyft, earn more, and will be incentivized to abandon Uber. Again, given Uber's much larger share, Uber again likely comes out ahead and increases the relative NYC trip market share. Okay, this is a different point. We're saying, let's say Lyft launches those very strict lockouts, but they just select a very let's say Lyft-only drivers basically, and say, okay, you guys are our guys, but that's a smaller subgroup of drivers. So let's say they can keep that subgroup of drivers really busy, but Uber's permanent market share then, instead of being a 75% versus 25% dynamic, Uber's market share might be like 85 or 90% versus Lyft's market share declining to 10 or 15%, if that makes sense. It should be noted that current UR status quo remaining, so even if none of it changes, even if you keep the industry UR as it is, it will also likely result in Uber only, Lyft only NYC drivers. Driver lockouts are usually based on how busy you are with one app, so drivers will likely choose to go all in with one app versus the other. So for example, what we're saying is Uber's basically, as you could, as their email says, it's saying drivers without trip activity over a period of time may be added to the wait list and unable to go online. Even in the old scenario, remember, Uber wants to incentivize people to be on their app, to incentivize, to not get locked out. So even if the status quo remained, it would basically lead to Uber only and Lyft only drivers, but it wouldn't lead to a situation where Lyft gets killed. Still a horrible outcome, but better than Lyft getting killed. So, okay, let's explain. Okay, so you might be wondering, okay, so what's the solution here? Okay, so we believe NYC TLC drivers should make it clear that they would like to eliminate the use of UR altogether. Now, the New York Taxi Workers Alliance said, you also have to remember, NYTWA should get credit for a lot, but they also represent the interests of the yellow cab industry. You have to remember that. I mean, everybody, we're conflicted in different ways. You run a fleet, but we try to be balanced. But, I think you have to layer that on, that they represent the interests of the yellow cab industry. We're not saying that's a crime. Someone has to represent their interests, but the TWA is saying that, no, keep the UR and kind of have Uber and Lyft figure it out. We actually don't think that's the right way to go. We think the UR should be eliminated. We believe NYC TLC drivers should make it clear that they would like to eliminate the use of UR altogether. Rather, protect wages via enforcing a strict for-hire vehicle supply cap and perhaps TLC driver's license cap. This is a point we kind of agree with. We wouldn't say a kind of a cap to the license, but maybe make the exam harder, or maybe we don't want to say make the fee more expensive, but that's another way to go about that. That if the fee is more expensive, then it kind of, the barrier to entry into the industry is higher. But we would rather think making the exam a bit harder is a more equitable way to go about it versus, increasing the licensing fee. It's sort of a reason why. So it says, okay, so rather protect wages via enforcing a strict for-hire vehicle cap and perhaps a TLC driver license cap. It's sort of the reason why the, wait for it, tax medallion system in 1937 and TLC plate cap in 2018 were established in the first place. Okay. Hey guys. So just returning to this, we just took did some video editing, but just to continue on, I wanted to go back to the article that we're going to embed this video in. And so just to kind of follow along, this is going to be the back half of this video. Again, we're going to try to keep it short. Maybe the whole video is about 50 to 60 minutes. So while lockouts are occurring, we've gone over that. Who is Uber blaming for the lockouts and whether that criticism is legitimate? We've gone over that. What the TLC can do about lockouts. So now we're going to, and how we believe drivers should think about lockouts. We've actually kind of gone over bullet point 4, but bullet point 3 kind of relates to bullet point 4. So let's talk about a very popular topic, which is everybody kind of understands the TLC plate cap or vehicle licensing controls. I think let's talk about this concept of capping driver's licenses. So I know I said I didn't want to read any articles verbatim except the one we're embedding, but I think this one we won't read verbatim, but might be worth reading the most of it. Reading from it a lot, I should say. So, okay, so this is May 1st, 2024. The title was 180,000 NYC TLC drivers. And so regulator needs to enforce strict vehicle license cap and likely limit new TLC driver's licenses. Limiting vehicle and driver supply will eliminate need for UR and risk of lockouts. Remember, this is before lockouts arose. We wrote this on May 1st. So there are now over 180,000 active NYC TLC license for hire transportation drivers and 4,000 pending driver applications, with 109,000 TLC plated vehicles and 13,500 total tax medallions. Increasing NYC for hire vehicle supply could be disastrous. Capping or limiting the number of newly issued TLC drivers licenses should also be considered, an idea previously championed by several driver advocates, and we'll get into that. Regulator should get rid of utilization, right? UR, which we've just spoken about in the first 35 minutes, roughly, of this video. Base formula, instead strictly enforce the for-hire vehicle license pause, commonly referred as the TLC plate cap, and revise its driver licensing regime given sub 53% industry-wide UR and potential risk of driver lockouts. Remember, this is before lockouts. So we're not saying, oh, we're so smart, we saw the driver lockouts. A lot of people who are kind of tracking this could see this lockout thing arising. TLC drivers that meet certain trip and experience thresholds should be able to claim their own TLC plates via reissuance of existing FHV licenses, natural attrition, with an annual limit of TLC plate reissuance. There's a lot. We went over a lot of this article, but this is, I think, a very key article we wrote. Okay, so we're kind of, we're just kind of going to read verbatim from it, but I'll try to go quick. There are now over 180,000 licensed NYC for hire transportation TLC drivers and over 4,000 new additional pending TLC driver license applications. Obviously, not everyone who has a TLC driver's license is actively working in the industry, but given there are currently over about 118,000 active NYC for hire vehicles, including yellow cabs, so 109,000 plus the 9,000, give or take, yellow cabs, but that's increasing. A lot of driver supply can rush the market. So our point is, if you have 180,000 licensed drivers and you have like 120-ish thousand cars, let's say the economy slows down or something, so those 60,000 excess active TLC drivers might rush the market, if that makes sense, which would cause and the interesting thing about that is if the economy slows down, then actually that might mean trip demand might actually decline. Not necessarily, but you have this horrible dynamic in a situation where the economy is slowing down, or even the economy levels out, and demand levels out, where you have all these drivers wanting to drive cars, and there not being enough cars for each one of them, but also this is more fundamental, there not being enough business for, even if you gave every one of them a car, let's say you issued 60,000 more TLC plates, that would be a disaster. I think everybody understands that. So this is a big industry in New York City. So I said, to put the driver numbers into perspective, if every NYC TLC licensed driver lived within the 5 boroughs, that would mean 1 out of every 50 city residents could legally drive a cab or far higher vehicle. If you assume every TLC driver's had 2 dependents, like children or parents they're taking care of, or partner, etc. I'm saying 2 dependents. They might have 4 dependents on average, or 5 dependents. The number of New Yorkers in NYC area business that would directly be impacted by the NYC TLC policy is staggering. Yet another way to contextualize the numbers is if NYC Uber and Lyft drivers were considered employees, not arguing they should be, both companies would be among the largest employers in New York State. Yes, as we reported, Uber and Lyft in NYC currently have several month waiting lists, but there's nothing preventing 50,000 plus currently inactive but licensed TLC drivers from working with the yellow cab or non-rideshare traditional black car livery base. The yellow cab industry would also welcome drivers to get the 4,000 inactive taxi medallions on the road. In our view, any yellow cab trip market share gain due to more active taxis would likely be zero sum in nature, trip share taken away from Uber versus market growth. Okay. Very simply put, there's still about 4,000, there's 3,500 yellow cabs that need to come online, and right now there's a lot of positive. We're not going to focus on that because yellow cabs can be dispatched by Uber and Lyft, but aren't subject to UR and minimum pay requirements. So let's say all of those yellow cabs go online. Trip share right now is relatively, it's not growing at 10%. So if you increase, if 3,500 yellow cabs came online with the drivers, and technically you could double shift those yellow cabs, so that's effectively, kind of 2 times the cars, if that makes sense, if you're double shifting those cars. So let's call it 7 to 8,000 vehicle supply, for hire vehicle supply comes online. That's zero sum in nature, meaning the market isn't growing to satisfy 8,000 more vehicles coming online. What will happen is probably the Uber and Lyft cars will lose trip share to those new cars. It's zero sum, meaning 1 trip gain for yellow cabs will probably be 1 trip, I'm making it simplistic, 1 trip loss for Uber and Lyft in NYC. So it's zero sum in nature. Although the market might, it's flatlining, or it's not growing. This market isn't growing at 10, 15% anymore in trips. Okay. Supply and demand. And this is just a graph that I think at one point there was 120-ish thousand drivers, but I think these 2 benchmarks are good to use. So November 2023, that's not that long ago, and April 2024, and that's just over 6,000. Over 6,000 new drivers coming online, or roughly 6,000 new drivers coming online. So supply and demand. We've stated the following many times in a lot of our content, including podcasts, often with our friends Abe Middleman and Carolyn Pross at NYC Taxi News. You can click the links. However, it's worth repeating again. Okay, this is kind of the key part. If there is a driver/vehicle supply and trip demand imbalance, the TLC needs to solve for equilibrium. This is an easy enough concept to understand, is indeed the reason a taxi medallion system was created in the late 1930s, 1937. By the way, sometimes vehicle supply needs to be added as well. So, and this is the key point to all of this. And it's trying to be simple about this, the first principles of it, if you will. If you have too many cars chasing too few trips, drivers' earnings will suffer. If you have too few cars, passengers and many drivers will suffer. So that's simple enough to understand. So if there's 100,000 cars chasing 50,000 trips, no one's going to make money. If there's 50,000 trips chasing, 2 million, if there's 50,000 cars chasing 2 million trips, you probably need to add cars, or, passengers might not have a great experience, and the drivers that don't own medallions or don't own their own right to operate might be subject to stricter leasing or barriers to entry, but they'll still probably be making money. That's the only difference. So that's kind of what you saw in like the 90s and in the early 2000s, even the early 2010s, where people were paying whatever the rate was, like 1,500, like for a yellow cab. I think the leasing rate was like a joint 1,500 to 2,000, 1,800, something like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but you'd be like, holy, like, wow, like, the driver's paying out of their pocket. Each driver per shift is paying like $800 or $900 per driver per week, or like $120 per shift or something like that. The exact math is something like that. You'd be, the key thing to layer on is like, okay, if you're paying $120, what are you earning? If you're paying $120 to earn $600 or $500, that's fine. Obviously, you don't want to pay the $120 for the medallion shift, but if you're earning 600, it's fine. People will complain about the 120, but you're earning money. So, okay. So I said, in addition, adding more NYC specific FHVs to already congested streets is antithetical to long-standing core city and state policy goal, reducing traffic congestion and encourage more people to reduce their carbon footprint by taking the subway or bus. These are such basic and uncontroversial statements we are making that we're beginning to feel like we're part of a groupthink experiment, as recent TLC policy decisions and justifications ignore the fundamental role of the TLC. The TLC, this is key. The TLC needs to ensure vehicle supply and trip demand are in balance. Now, another term for vehicle supply can also be driver supply. That can be one and the same thing. Does anyone disagree with this? And most people this is kind of an uncontroversial statement. Supply and demand need to be controlled, so everybody can make money. This is exactly why the taxi medallion system came. Great Depression came. I'm giving the 30-second overview, but everybody gets it. Like, Great Depression came. A lot of people went out of work. Everybody became a cab driver, a gypsy cab driver. And then there's not enough trips to go around. So the money gets diluted to where no one is earning anything. It's like the equivalent of having like a million hot dog stands in Manhattan. Like, no hot dog stand can earn money with a million hot dog stands. It just dilutes. You need regulation. Or even a better example is that if you're adding a million doctors a year in America, right? And keep the barrier of entry like nothing to become a doctor, then the earnings potential for a field that should be a professional field gets diluted. Okay, anyways, it should also be noted, protecting the iconic NYC taxi and in turn the city's for hire vehicle franchise provided a lot of financial benefits. Medallion auctions were a unique budget weapon, a sort of city reserve asset or currency, allowing NYC to balance its book. At the same time, it attracted long-term drivers of the industry who also stood to financially benefit and become genuine business owners. And like, look at this is from 2017. The city of New York expects to generate 1.2 billion in revenue from the sale of new taxi medallions from the fiscal years 2019 to 23. During fiscal year 2014, the city auctioned 10 years ago, auctioned 350 medallions, generating about $360 million. So the medallion was also it's like a city asset. It's almost like how the US government can issue a reserve currency, like print dollars. Like New York City, the medallion was like such a unique asset where it's like a New York City currency where if they needed to raise money, they could issue some. Now, obviously, if they were crazy with it, then it would dilute the value of the medallion. But they kind of shot themselves in the foot by flooding the streets with too many cars. Also, driver earnings suffered and all of that stuff. So, okay, but this is an important point. We know the regulator and other political decision makers understand the points we're making. They aren't dumb, and we're not trying to apply that either. In our view, the underlying issue related to recent flawed policy action by the TLC is a web of politics that is very hard to fully make sense of. The friend of my enemy is my enemy, is my friend, is my enemy, all of this stuff. So we did this kind of Venn diagram where, you have to be fair. We don't want to be a publication that's like, oh, the government is this and that. And we're not trying to throw mud at everybody all the time and constantly complain. We understand there's so many different things going on here, but at the same time, policy, there's certain policy things like, I guess what I'm specifically referring to is this addition of 10,000-ish or nearly, well, in the year 2023, it was more than 10,000 because they released 1,000 in March 2023, and then another plus 9,000 more when they reinstated the electric vehicle exemption. And that also had other implications. There was always a wheelchair accessible vehicle exemption. So then that also kind of got killed. So that's why accessibility advocates were upset, because they're like, okay, if you give someone the option for an EV to get a TLC plate, then they're not going to buy a wheelchair car, which is more expensive. So they'll go for the EV. So just look at the supplies, the numbers speak for themselves. Like, we started March, below 100,000, let's call it 95,000 in early 2023. And then they released 1,000, which was controversial, but not the end of the world. Then in October, they allowed the release of this, which is subject to lawsuit. And thankfully, the New York, to their great credit, the New York Taxi Workers Alliance did a lawsuit, prevented that. Some people say, well, that caused a stampede. In my opinion, if you just saw the numbers, the same amount of, instead of 3 weeks, it would have been added in 2 or 3 months, basically. So the vehicle supply went up by, 10%, from even more than 10% from the beginning of 2023. But if you had that many vehicles on, the trips better be going up that much too. Obviously, the trips aren't going up that much. That growth rate is not there for the trips. You're adding more vehicles and there's not trips. Then they keep on referring to, well, pre-pandemic, there was 120,000. In reality, the real number is 114,000. But why do you think lockouts occurred in late 2019? I mean, this speaks for itself. From February 2019 to March 2020, just before the pandemic, there was natural attrition going on. Obviously, this is indicative of there being too many cars on the street. Like, this is just like, it is an opinion, but also the data very clearly supports even this 114,000, 120,000. This was oversaturation. And that was pre-COVID. Obviously, yellow cab, overall trips are still not fully recovered. Uber and Lyft trips may have fully recovered, but green taxis and all of that stuff, that's still, quite a bit down. So anyways, that's what I'm referring to about adding more cars, is just, we've talked about this, So we say, you have generally odd political Venn diagrams that are deeply aligned on some policy but don't touch on others. For example, an advocacy group, like Transportation Alternatives wants less cars on city streets and more street space converted to best pedestrian-only thoroughfares, while some EV infrastructure companies want to install more curbside chargers, which would actually promote using NYC curbside space for vehicles. So the point I'm making is that sometimes you're like, okay, we want to make more EV charging hubs, but then you want less cars. So if you're converting the curbside to not a place for cars, but you want to install curbside charge, it's complicated. So what we write is that the danger here is the TLC might not be seeing the forest, but just a lot of individual trees. Today, we'll make some specific technical suggestions for the TLC and other advocates to consider. Again, our opinions. Now, this is going to kind of conclude this video. That's why we're choosing this article, because I think it summarizes our opinion and the advocate's opinion, and it goes to address kind of these last points. That's what this is all about. What can the TLC do about lockouts? How we believe drivers should think about lockouts, suggestions that would prevent lockouts, including those already proposed by prominent driver advocates. So we're kind of, this will kind of conclude this video talking about this. So we say, now the regulator, the TLC, and the regulator and its board might say AutoMarketplace. Why does your publication keep acting? Because we've been saying this, criticizing the TLC quite heavily for the addition of more vehicles when it was clearly not needed. So we are, so let's start with the first suggestion. It's time to get rid of UR. Get rid of UR. We're not going to belabor a simple concept. If you cap for hire vehicle supply, you cap the supply, and enforce said cap, you're inherently protecting driver earnings. That was the whole point of the TLC plate cap. Just think about the simple point we're making. We're saying if you have a limited number of vehicles, it's like the genesis of the taxi medallion industry. Yes, it can be abused, but there's ways to, and we'll conclude by how you can also protect from abuse. But the concept is correct. basically. That was the whole point, that you can't have infinity cars uh, on the street. I mean, I don't think that's a controversial point. There needs to be a limited amount of cars, even from a congestion and environmental perspective. That has to be the case. So we're saying if you enforce the for hire vehicle supply cap, then adding utilization rate on top of that is just overkill. So then you don't need UR. Along the same lines, but a point not spoken about as much, but now other driver advocates are speaking about this, and you'll see some highlights below. If you cap so this is in conjunction with the vehicle supply cap. We're asking for both things, we think. If you cap or control how many new TLC driver licenses are issued, you're also inherently protecting driver earnings. Adding a UR-based utilization rate-based formula is overkill. So again, if you also cap like how many drivers licenses there are, it's kind of like what London does, but they do it via like this extremely difficult test called the knowledge. So in London, the United Kingdom, they don't have like a medallion, but they have this super hard test to drive a black cab. But then for Uber, they're more laissez-faire, I think. So anyways, so capping that also has, whether that's a hard cap or like more of like a soft cap, like a inflation limitation, like you can only increase the driver licenses by, I don't know, 1% or 2% a year or something. So killing the utilization rate paradigm is important because along with many TLC drivers, fear is lockouts returning. I mean, this is so obvious. This is May 1st. We were talking about this before May 1st, and here we are on June 2nd, and lockouts have returned. And I mean, this is just it was so easy to predict. Fear is in the industry. Killing the UR paradigm is important because along with many TLC drivers, fear is lockouts returning if the industry keeps abiding by this fairly complex and circular mechanism to solve for minimum pay. Let's make life simple like they did in the 1930s. Cap the number of for-hire vehicles, and let's say this new thing as well, perhaps control the number of new TLC drivers licenses issued, and there is no need to measure utilization rate because you have supply controls. And by the way, if demand starts going way up, like New York City's population 10 years from now is like 1 million more or something, then you can address that issue by adding more vehicles. Like, this is insanity. I'm not saying this is like etched in stone 10 commandments forever, but it's better to control this now because right now there's clearly oversaturation. And when the time comes to add more cars, you have a mechanism to do that, whether it's auctioning off medallions or, TLC plates that are handed in, giving them out. So anyways, driver earnings will be protected and have legitimate upside beyond the mandated minimum pay unless the TLC does not enforce the TLC plate cap or other proposed driver licensing limitations. Supply and demand and supply. Let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so TLC driver's license cap. Last October, we wrote a piece about Toronto City Council effectively capping the number of drivers and turn vehicles who could work for Uber and Lyft, which is analogous to a driver and vehicle license cap. So what Toronto did, and I think it got overturned as we note, is they're basically saying, okay, however many people are driving for Uber and Lyft in Toronto, Canada, obviously I'm talking about, is that, okay, there can't be any more because there's clearly enough supply and we don't want to dilute driver earnings. I'm sure that's what the background to that was, or at least one of the main backgrounds to that was. Now, it should be noted in December 2023, Uber effectively won a case that undid the policy, but the mayor of Toronto and their city council appears to be attempting to re-implement the driver cap again. Where Toronto had pushed the envelope was capping for hire vehicle driver licenses for Uber and Lyft, something that IDG and other NYC driver advocates, he's a very famous advocate, Raul Rivera, had actually been pushing for an NYC. And so this is in public testimony. This is literally in the testimony. March 2023. We're not saying you come from Nepal, you come from China. Yes, you can be a driver, but get on a waiting list. We can't hand TLC driver's license out like it's candy. We got to bring value to it. I'm not an Uber driver. I'm not a Lyft driver. I'm a New York City Taxi Limousine Commission driver. Save my license, Raul Rivera, who's a driver advocate. And then Andrew Greenblatt, who's an executive director at Independent Drivers Guild, IDG. He said, you defend utilization and keep it high by throttling supply. This is, basic economics, supply and demand. This is how it works. Again, you can obviously hear it right from then by, we'll provide the links to this, but you can hear this right from them. I take exception with the point that the TLC has no role to play in the lockouts. The role is you create the market. If you create a market that doesn't regulate the supply of drivers, you are either going to have this spiral of too many drivers, not have enough passengers, or Uber and Lyft are going to respond with lockouts. This is March 2023, a year ago. Like, this was, again, a very obvious thing everybody in the industry who was in it could foresee. So we think Raul and Andrew's comments are easy to understand and logical. We just want to note, though, as outlined above, if there are over 180,000 TLC licensed drivers today, the TLC must be careful not to run the risk of adding 60,000 plus more TLC Plate vehicles to the road if the regulator repeated its October 2023 policy of fully reinstating the EV exemption of the TLC Plate cap. Given the excess licensed driver supply, the same policy mistake would essentially collapse the entire industry next time around. We say that New York Taxi Workers Alliance lawsuit basically saved the market. The tax medallion obviously would get destroyed if anybody can have a TLC plate, or it's beyond the tax medallion getting destroyed. The industry, the earnings would just get diluted to nothing. So now I just want to, I know we're coming to the end of the article. I want to make another point. So as we mentioned, we are, and we'll talk about this as well, and the last point of the article is that we come from a fleet background. We started our fleet. Obviously now we run AutoMarketplace. We have other businesses in this industry, but we started when there was no TLC plate cap. But I totally get the point that if you cap TLC plates, then the drivers who don't have access to their own TLC plate might be like, kind of in like this indentured service to like the guys who like these leasing companies, or even individuals for that matter, who have TLC plates in their own name and rent out. We get that. So we say, before we conclude and before we're called scumbags or predators, we do appreciate long-term NYC TLC drivers who are stuck in leasing or rental arrangements, even if the arrangements are commercial, meaning that this, they're saying predatory leasing and all of this stuff. Honestly, we've gone over this before and we've had interviews. It's single-digit margin business. At best, a great leasing company, a large leasing company can make like 12% or something. It's a very tough business. In any case, like insurance costs are going up, all of that stuff, collisions, all of that liability. Let's make this simple. So I'm addressing that point. So just to be clear, out of the 110,000, the last time I checked, I think the vast majority, like 70 to 75% plus of those TLC plates, actually belong to individuals in the first place. So the market itself is already set up where the vast majority of TLC plates, or a significant majority, I should say, is in control of an individual. So that's number one. But doesn't mean we, leave the other people like tough luck. So let's make it simple. If an NYC TLC driver has reached a certain trip, and license thresholds, so let's say 10,000 confirmed trips or 5 years with an active NYC TLC driver's license, they should have the opportunity to claim a TLC plate that has been handed in. So let's say a leasing company, or even a driver for that matter, quits the industry, hands in their TLC plate because an individual driver can't sell their TLC plate, and that's the vast majority of plates, so they hand it in. This would not increase for hire vehicle supply, because if, it's again zero sum. Someone handed in a plate and then you're distributing the plate. Now, to respect the benefits of natural for hire vehicle license attrition, there's an underlying reason someone is handing in their TLC plate. We would also suggest adding an annual limit of how many TLC plates can be reissued every year. So our point is that fundamentally, if this TLC plate is worth so much, for someone to hand that in means that simply there's not enough money to be made. I mean, that's just like, I think that's an uncontroversial statement, because all the incentives are to keep the plate active. So if, let's say, 1,000 are handed in, I'm not saying reissue 1,000, but reissue, like, let's say 500 of the 1,000, right? Now, the taxi medallion industry is going to scream at me saying no TLC plates should be reissued, but I actually think there should be some balance here, where there should be a waiting list, guys who are not going to do yellow cab, or long-term kind of, app of that paradigm, the app paradigm, they should have an opportunity like this and a structured opportunity. And maybe the city can even raise money by saying that, listen, for $5,000, you can get on the wait list. So just, you got to create all this incentive. Again, that money is going to the city. I'm even trying to help out the city, giving them ideas on how to raise money because, they probably do need to raise money. Okay, last points, artificial government caps. So, this is, a lot of people are going to get into like, okay, taxi medallion, wasn't there a bubble, $1 million, this all is going to happen again. This is all, you're trying to create stupid regulations to cap supply and not let capitalism thrive. So we're going to address that very, very succinctly and very, to the point. Some from Uber and Lyft might think, great, another group with socialist leanings, we're referring to us, who want to create artificial government caps and not let laissez-faire robber baron techno-capitalism flourish. To that, we say a few things. We are capitalists, so we're in business for profit. We're not trying to hide that. But every market needs regulation, and usually for good reasons. I mean, think about child labor as a very simple example. There are air rights in Manhattan for a reason, and everybody understands why. So air rights, if you don't know, it's like every building can't be built like 100 stories tall in Manhattan, or number one, the city's going to be a city of shadows. And also there's like aesthetic reasons for that. So you need to somehow create a mechanism to say, hey, if you own this piece of land, you can only build so high, because New York land is limited, Manhattan land, even Brooklyn is limited. So you can't have like 100-story buildings next to each other all the time. So you have air rights in Manhattan. Like, this is uncontroversial. Everybody understands why. So additionally, if two companies control 80% of a market, that's a utility like duopoly and must be regulated to prevent abuse, especially with robo-taxis on the horizon. So this is another point. If two companies control 80% of all trips, you need to start regulating that, or that duopoly, on the verge of, you could even say Uber, not quite monopoly, but near monopoly. If, let's say, Uber has 50 or 60% of it, that's one company that controls that. You need to, I mean, that's why we have antitrust regulation in this country. I'm not saying, crush Uber. They have a business run. We understand that. But when you're that powerful, it's like if Con Edison is the only electricity company you can supply with, imagine if you just let them set the rates themselves and no oversight. It'd be crazy. So when the taxi medallion industry had the monopoly, there was regulation, lease caps. So you couldn't charge. So to be clear, if you were an owner of a taxi medallion, you couldn't rent it for more than a certain amount. And the lesson of its collapse is perhaps certain powerful financial speculators who got involved in the industry should actually have been more regulated. Not that the medallion system was inherently bad. It would be the equivalent of saying the lesson of the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008 and 9, or what unfolded in 2008 or 9 and 10, was that banks shouldn't have given people loans to buy houses. Many banks needed to have more regulatory oversight, especially ones that can pose a systemic threat. See recent example of Silicon Valley Bank. So what I mean by that is that, okay, during the subprime housing crisis, obviously I'm not going to go deep into what happened, but basically a very simplistic way to say is that the lesson from the subprime housing crisis, sorry, let me enlarge this. So the lesson from the subprime housing crisis wasn't that, the lesson is that we shouldn't give loans to people to buy houses. That would be a crazy lesson. You shouldn't give people who are not qualified to buy certain houses at certain prices loans if it poses a systemic threat to the so meaning if JP Morgan, and I'm not saying JP Morgan did this, but let's say Countrywide Financial or something, who were one of the largest mortgage lenders at that time, if they gave like 3 million loans out to people who clearly shouldn't have got those loans and no one was checking on them, and then those loans were packaged in securities and sold to Wall Street, so they were just kind of a broker but generating the fees, and they were too good. That's actually the issue more than loans being given out in general. There just needs to be more regulation on the leverage levels, on the loans being given out. But banks fundamentally need to give people loans to buy houses. The houses weren't the problem, if you will. So I guess I'm maybe not explaining that in the greatest way, but I'm saying the analogy to the taxi medallion crisis is that the medallion crisis, one part of it undoubtedly was the rise of Uber and Lyft and their disruption and the rise of this thing called like a e-hail that didn't quite neatly fit into existing taxi regulations. But another part of it was yellow cabs are still doing trips, even with the rise of Uber and Lyft. Obviously, their trips went down. The medallion crisis was a debt crisis, actually. And what that means is that people were speculating on taxi medallions. People were giving, on a $1 million taxi medallion, they're saying, okay, we'll give you a $950,000 loan or an $800,000 loan. So they're treating the asset like it's, like it's a triple A, double A commercial property. Well, that's a bad example to use right now, like a really good housing or something. They're treating the collateral as like extremely pristine. So what actually needs to happen next time around, if we have the system arise, is we have to say, okay, if someone's going to buy a tax medallion, someone has to understand who's buying this, what the leverage levels are, and that disclosure needs to be made on a yearly basis. And I think the TLC has some regulations around this, but that's actually the lesson of that. The lesson wasn't like the taxi medallion shouldn't exist. The lesson perhaps like there were good elements of the taxi medallion industry. Another lesson could be you should perhaps limit how much one entity can control of a market like the taxi medallion industry. Now you have lease caps, so that is a protection from that. But also perhaps you could say, more than, I'm just making this up, but you could also say that, okay, for taxi medallions, only you have to designate, like one is a corporate owned medallion, one is an individual only owned medallion, like a driver owned medallion. But then the thing is, the drivers also want to sell their medallion. So you have to be very cognizant. They're also buying the medallion to get into business. So what we're saying in all of this is basically, if the TLC is saying that we want drivers to have their own TLC plate, which the vast majority have it, and some don't for sure, and we just addressed that in terms of redistributing naturally handed in TLC plates. There's also another element of, and we'll ask this to people, fundamentally, should there be a should there be a cost to entry, is what we're trying to say. Should there actually be a cost to entry? Sorry, I'm just looking for one other piece. I think it is here. Apologies for this. Oh, here it is. Okay. So March UR, just to give you an update, it's still everybody's still below that 53%. Uber is edging closer, but it's still below that. Obviously, Lyft is way below, but we made our argument. So we'll just put it like this. We'll put it like this. And this is going to be kind of one of our last points related to this. So with the shock, let me put my bubble here. With the shock release of 10,000 FHV licenses, TLC plates in 2023 alone, the city and TLC are not following the FHV license policy they correctly created in the summer of 2018. Limiting the issue of TLC plates was fundamentally created to protect driver wages. More broadly, the attraction and promise of Uber and Lyft across the world is and has always been work when you want, where you want. In addition, use something you need and own anywhere, your car, to earn additional income. More applicable pitch outs of NYC, like use the car you already have to do Uber, but obviously in NYC you need a TLC plate and it's more commercial. When there is an anyone can join when they want driver supply dynamic, the government often incorrectly approaches the problem as follows. 100,000 drivers should earn $30, 110,000, yada, 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 500,000 drivers should earn $30. Is there enough demand and money to go around that makes this possible? Think about what we're saying. Like, if it's a free for, there's no way to keep this paradigm. Like, you just can't say, you can't have 500,000 drivers earning $30 an hour. How is that possible? So is there enough demand and money, at least possible right now, is there enough demand and money to go around that makes this possible? Clearly, to just view driver pay without contextualizing how supply might impact that pay is not intelligent, respectfully. Uber and Lyft are not social welfare institutions that are under obligation to pay infinity drivers $30 an hour. These are for-profit businesses. They generate demand that the passengers are the customer, the driver is less their customer, more their partner in helping them provide services to their customers. With the UR-based driver pay formula, the TLC has unintentionally given Uber and Lyft more power to deepen their duopoly grip of the NYC TLC market and hold drivers drivers hostage. As soon as a new entrant passes the 10,000 trip per day high volume based threshold, that company's out of business as it can't achieve at 53% standalone UR. And we wrote an article about Revel. I think they've passed the 10,000 trip per day. They're very close, but then all of a sudden their stats disappeared. In any case, the demand controls all the power in a world of UR. However, the supply accrues value when it's harder to disintermediate drivers. Vehicle supply caps, remember 70% plus of drivers control their own TLC plate, and perhaps TLC driver license issuance control mechanisms make exam harder, gives drivers true power, not UR. For example, before Uber kicks a TLC driver off its platform, they will need to think twice because the driver is one of X versus one of infinity. Just think about that. So I would say the IDG definitely has a point, and other driver advocates like Raul has a point where if you limit the number of driver licenses, that gives power to the drivers, undoubtedly. Now, the only issue with that is if a new guy came to New York or somebody and they want to get into the TLC industry, I mean, you can't make them wait 10 years to have a shot kind of thing just to get a driver's license. But at the same, like there's a balance to that in any case. So I think this comment from Optimus, and this is in the Substack, and I'm sorry this video has gone above an hour, but I just think this is such an important topic. So we'll try to wrap this up quickly. But Optimus writes, I think the utilization rate is a good thing for this industry since it literally gives insight into how busy drivers are on the platform. So Optimus is arguing for the UR. What the TLC needs to do is control the number of TLC licenses they issue out. So he's talking about driver licenses. Those should be based on projected demand or calculations from the UR. Also, TLC needs to do more to stop illegal taxis. There are so many of them all over the city. This is impacting legal TLC driver earnings. That's actually a really great point, that you need to get rid of illegal operations, 100%. That's a very valid point. While controlling vehicle supply sounds like a solution, it also creates other problems. Its true drivers' incomes will go up, but also will cost the cost of operation, especially for those that are renting vehicles. So we just addressed that with lease caps. You can prevent that abuse, And it says controlling the vehicle supply will essentially turn TLC Plate into a medallion, which is not a good idea based on the yellow cab experience. So the point Medallion is going for $1 million. So we just addressed that point where it went to $1 million because more of financial speculators and no one paying attention to what's going on, not too dissimilar from the subprime crisis. Even regular FHV TLC plates were being sold under LLC at $35K cash, no payment plan or financing. I wonder how many Uber Lyft drivers have $35K sitting in a bank account for no reason. So his point is like, hey, if someone just wants to enter this industry, like $35,000 in cash, like this is crazy. And we get that, right? But we're just going to this might be an unpopular take, but we're just going to address his actually very valid. That's very smart commentary by Optimus. So we say great commentary. I think there are multiple ways to protect against your very legitimate points about the problems that can and will arise from vehicle supply caps. We're not, it's a valid point. So for example, lease caps are already implemented in the Medallion system. Another regulation is stringent control over leverage levels when someone buys a Medallion, or what he's referring to as an FHV corporation, just like the banking system. For example, no one should be able to buy a taxi Medallion with 90% debt. Ensuring leverage levels aren't out of whack will also decrease the likelihood of valuation bubbles forming. Utilization rate, is an academically good idea, but it's overkill if one already controls vehicle supply and or TLC driver license issuance. If you didn't have those mechanisms, then the argument for UR is stronger. The core question that many people have to, and this is kind of where we'll conclude our video. The core question that many people have to ask themselves is, should there be no cost to enter the NYC TLC industry? If a driver owns a Medallion, they have equity upside in a franchise. So they invest in the industry and their hard work has a return beyond their annual income. If you strip away the equity upside, driving a taxi becomes less exciting, we think at least. In terms of the TLC plates having value, number one, an individual TLC plate cannot be sold. But let's say there's a paradigm where that's happening or can happen, which would destroy the Medallion value, by the way. But in any case, in terms of a TLC plate having value, there's only I think it's 25% or 30% are owned in sellable corporations, basically, like you're basically selling a business that has a TLC plate attached to it, an FHV license. A driver can benefit from that if they invest the money into buying an LLC. If they believe everything should be free, and again, this is controversial. America is not the country, correct country to live in. Again, it all comes down to mentality and vision for the industry. And this is just getting less controversial, like just more to the point of what I am trying to say in this reply. Should there be no cost of entry into the world's most valuable for-hire transportation and taxi market? Our opinion is there should be a cost, and it will also give drivers and investors with a long-term mindset equity upside. Otherwise, Uber and Lyft shareholders, the demand will accrue the value of the industry. The demand will effectively own the market, and the supply will have no power, disposable in many ways, easy to replace one driver with another one. So, and in terms of recent insights from our NYC FHV, we'll just say that all the things we've spoken about, like we've seen drivers quit who are part-timers and who just, they got nervous about the lockouts, and a lot of people can speak to that. But just to conclude, I think the main point here is hopefully we explain like what the background to the Uber NYC lockouts are, like what's going on, like all of these different things. And so, we hope this video is helpful. Please let us know any additional comments or, any things you want to mention, any things you think we forgot. Obviously, this is more than an hour video, I think, but this is such an important topic and so consequential that we hope this provides context. We're not saying we hope if you disagree, great, let us know where you disagree, but we just want to kind of present our perspective and also kind of highlight more of the technicalities of these lockouts. So thanks again, guys. Appreciate it. We're going to publish this, embed this video in, and we'll see you next time. Appreciate it.